There are mountain towns in Appalachia where strangers are noticed immediately. A new wagon, an unfamiliar horse, a face no one recognizes at Sunday service. In isolated communities, outsiders rarely remain anonymous, which is why what happened in the Tennessee settlement of Red Ash Hollow during the autumn of 1877 terrified everyone who lived there, because nobody could explain how the Harper family had arrived, and stranger still, no one could remember exactly when they had arrived either. Before we continue into the hills of eastern Tennessee, I want to ask you something. Where are you listening from tonight? A bedroom? A long drive home? The quiet of a night shift? Tell me in the comments. These stories have a way of finding people after dark. Back to Red Ash Hollow. The town sat deep within the Tennessee mountains. Fewer than 120 people called it home. Coal mining, farming, and trapping kept families alive. Life moved slowly there. Everyone knew everyone. Children grew up together. Families attended the same church for generations. Outsiders were uncommon, which made the Harper family impossible to ignore. There were 4 of them. Elias Harper, tall, thin, thought, soft-spoken, perhaps 40 years old. His wife, Margaret Harper, always polite, always smiling. Their daughter, Clara, who appeared to be around 17, and their youngest son, Benjamin, perhaps 10 years old. They lived in a small white farmhouse nearly 2 miles outside town. A house everyone somehow accepted had always been there. The problem was, it hadn't. The first person to notice something strange was Sarah Bennett, Red Ash Hollow's 28-year-old schoolteacher. She had taught every child in the settlement for 5 years. One cold October morning, she was taking attendance. Benjamin Harper, she called. A young boy sitting near the back raised his hand. "Present, ma'am." Sarah paused. Several students looked confused. Benjamin smiled politely. She checked her records. Benjamin Harper's name had been entered into the attendance ledger, in her own handwriting, 3 months earlier. But Sarah couldn't remember meeting him. After class, she approached another teacher. "When did the Harper family move here?" The older woman frowned. "Haven't they always lived near Crow Ridge?" Sarah hesitated. "No, I don't think so." The woman looked puzzled. "Of course they have." Sarah wasn't convinced. That evening, she visited Sheriff Thomas Hale, a former Civil War veteran known for his practical nature. He listened patiently as Sarah explained her concerns. "You'd think an entire family appeared out of nowhere?" he asked. "I think nobody remembers them arriving," Sarah replied. The sheriff chuckled. Mountain towns are full of stories. But later that night, he opened the county records, land ownership documents, tax registrations, birth records. The Harper family existed in all of them. Dating back years, their names appeared perfectly normal, except for one detail. Every document looked brand new, as if written recently. The ink hadn't faded. The paper lacked age. Despite supposedly being years old, Sheriff Hale closed the ledger slowly. Something wasn't right. 3 days later, he rode to the Harper farmhouse. The family welcomed him warmly. Margaret offered tea. Elias answered every question calmly. "How long have you lived here?" Hale asked. Elias smiled. "Oh, several years now." "What year did you arrive?" "For the first time." Elias hesitated. Margaret looked toward her husband. Clara stopped eating. Little Benjamin stared silently into his cup. Then Elias answered, "We've always been here." Sheriff Hale noticed something unsettling. None of them blinked, not once. As he prepared to leave, Benjamin spoke. Sheriff Hale turned. The boy smiled. "You shouldn't go near Hollow Creek tomorrow." "Why?" Benjamin tilted his head slightly. "Because the bridge is going to collapse." The sheriff frowned. "How do you know that?" Benjamin simply shrugged. It already happened, the next afternoon. The bridge over Hollow Creek collapsed, killing 2 horses and injuring a local farmer. Sheriff Hale stood among the wreckage in stunned silence. No one had predicted structural weakness. No storms had occurred. Benjamin Harper had known, exactly 24 hours earlier. That night, Sarah Bennett visited the sheriff again. "You believe me now?" Hale remained quiet. Finally, he said, "I think we need to find out who the Harpers really are." Sarah nodded. neither of them realized. The Harper family had already noticed their interest, because high on Crow Ridge, 4 figures stood silently outside the farmhouse, watching the lights of Red Ash Hollow below. Margaret Harper spoke softly. "They're beginning to remember." Elias nodded. "It happens every time." Young Benjamin looked toward town. "What do we do now?" Clara answered before anyone else. "We leave." Elias shook his head slowly. "No, not yet. We still have time." Then he added words that would haunt Sarah Bennett for the rest of her life. "They haven't figured out what year this really is." 2 days later, Sarah Bennett discovered something impossible. While organizing supplies in the schoolhouse basement, she uncovered an old class photograph dated 1851, 6 years earlier. Dozens of children stood in front of the original schoolhouse. Teachers sat in the front row. Sarah examined the faded faces carefully. Then her blood ran cold. Standing among the students, smiling directly at the camera, was Benjamin Harper. Exactly the same age, wearing the same expression, without having aged a single day. Sarah immediately brought the photograph to Sheriff Hale. The sheriff stared silently. "That's impossible," he whispered. "Benjamin can't be older than 10. Sarah pointed toward another figure. Standing near the back, a teenage girl. Dark dress, long braided hair. The caption beneath read, "Clara Harper." The same Clara currently living outside town, unchanged after 36 years. Hale turned the photograph over. Written on the back was a sentence in faded handwriting. "The Harper family arrived last winter. Nobody remembers where they came from." The sheriff looked at Sarah. "When was this written?" Sarah answered quietly. 1851. Hale's expression darkened. "Then who exactly have we been talking to, outside?" The autumn wind moved through Red Ash Hollow, and somewhere beyond Crow Ridge, a family who had supposedly lived there for years, prepared for another departure, because they had done this before, again, and again, and again. Sheriff Thomas Hale and Sarah Bennett spent the rest of that evening inside the small records room attached to Red Ash Hollow's church. The old photograph from 1851 lay between them. Benjamin Harper, 10 years old. Unchanged, Clara Harper, 17 years old. Exactly as they appeared in 1877. It wasn't possible, yet the evidence sat directly in front of them. "This has to be some kind of mistake," Sarah whispered. Hale shook his head. "I fought in the war," he said. "I've seen men survive wounds that should have killed them, but I've never seen this." They searched through decades of town records. The deeper they looked, the stranger things became. An old census from 1832 listed Elias and Margaret Harper as residents. A church attendance book from 1816 mentioned them donating supplies after a flood. A faded newspaper clipping from 1798 described a quiet family named Harper settling near another Tennessee community. Every description matched perfectly. The same faces, the same names, never aging, always arriving shortly before unusual events occurred, and then disappearing. Sarah looked up. "They've been doing this for almost 100 years. Hale's expression darkened. "Or longer." 3 days later, they visited Martha Gaines, the oldest resident in Red Ash Hollow. At 86 years old, Martha remembered stories passed down from her grandparents. When Sarah showed her the photograph, Martha went silent. Then she closed the curtains. "My grandmother spoke of them," she said quietly. "The travelers." "The travelers?" Hale asked. Martha nodded. "She said they appeared every generation, always the same family. They'd stay for a while, then disappear." Sarah leaned forward. "Did your grandmother know who they were?" Martha hesitated. "No, but she knew what followed them." "What followed them?" Hale asked. The old woman looked toward the mountains. "People forgetting things they shouldn't." Over the next week, strange changes spread through Red Ash Hollow. Neighbors forgot lifelong friendships. Children couldn't remember the names of teachers they had known for years. A blacksmith forgot how to perform techniques he'd practiced since childhood. Entire conversations vanished from memory. But there was one disturbing pattern. Everyone forgot different things. Except for one thing they all remembered perfectly. The Harper family had always lived there. Sarah noticed it first. She asked residents when the Harpers had arrived. Every answer differed, Oh, they've been here 10 years. No, I remember them arriving after the flood. Haven't they always lived on Crow Ridge? Yet nobody could recall an actual moment they met them. It was as though the memories had been inserted afterward. That evening, Sheriff Hale returned home exhausted. His wife Emily greeted him at the door. "You've been spending a lot of time with Sarah Bennett lately," she said. Hale smiled faintly, trying to solve a mystery. Emily frowned. "What mystery?" "The Harper family." She looked confused. "What about them? When did they move here?" Emily laughed softly. "Thomas, they've always been here." His blood ran cold. "Emily, who taught Clara Harper piano lessons 5 years ago." His wife stared blankly. "I don't remember." "When did Benjamin start attending school?" "I don't know. But they've always been here, for the first time in years." Sheriff Thomas Hale felt afraid. Sarah experienced something worse. While reading her teaching journals from previous years, she found entries written in her own handwriting. Several mentioned Clara Harper helping with younger students. Others described Benjamin participating in class activities. Sarah couldn't remember any of it. The entries appeared authentic. The handwriting was undeniably hers. But the memories didn't exist. She stared at one particular sentence. "Clara mentioned they may be moving soon. I hope they stay." Sarah dropped the journal. She had never written those words, had she? For the first time, she questioned her own mind. Meanwhile, Elias Harper sat quietly on the porch of the farmhouse overlooking Red Ash Hollow. Margaret joined him. "They're investigating again," she said softly. Elias nodded. "It always happens." Benjamin stepped outside. "Should we leave?" "Not yet," Elias answered. Clara looked toward town. "The forgetting has started." Margaret closed her eyes. "It never gets easier." Benjamin frowned. "Do we tell them this time?" Elias remained silent for a long moment. Then he spoke. "They never believe us." 2 days later, Sarah made a horrifying discovery. Hidden within church archives was a leather journal belonging to Reverend Isaac Turner, dated 1798. She opened it carefully. Most entries described ordinary events: harvests, baptisms, funerals. Then she found a passage written with trembling handwriting. "The Harper family arrived 6 months ago. None recall seeing them come. The townsfolk insist they have always been present." Several pages later, people forget names. Histories change. Entire conversations disappear. Then, Mrs. Harper confessed something terrible tonight. Sarah continued reading. "She claims they are not responsible. She says this happens around them wherever they go." The next sentence nearly stopped Sarah's heart. "She begged us to leave before the hollow notices us." The journal ended abruptly. The remaining pages had been torn out. That evening, Sarah rushed to Sheriff Hale. After reading the journal, his face paled. "The hollow notices us," he repeated. "What does that mean?" Before Sarah could answer, a knock echoed through the sheriff's office. Hale opened the door. Clara Harper stood outside. Alone, rain dripped from her dark coat. "You need to stop looking," she said quietly. Hale's hand moved toward his revolver. "What are you?" Clara's expression held genuine sadness. "We're trying to protect you." Sarah stepped forward. "Protect us from what?" Clara looked toward the surrounding mountains. Then she whispered, "You think we're the reason people forget? We aren't. Then who is?" Hale demanded. Clara's eyes filled with fear. "The thing following us." Outside, the church bells began ringing. Even though nobody had entered the church, Clara stepped backward. Her voice shook. "It's here," the bells continued. Slow, heavy, wrong. And for the first time since arriving in Red Ash Hollow, Clara Harper looked terrified. The church bells continued ringing through the rain. Each toll echoed unnaturally through Red Ash Hollow. Sheriff Hale grabbed his coat. "Nobody rings the church bells after dark," he muttered. Clara backed away from the office doorway. "You need to listen carefully," she said. "We didn't cause this. We've spent generations running from it." Sarah stared at her. "What exactly is following you?" Clara hesitated. "We don't know what it is. We only know what it does." The bells suddenly stopped. The silence that followed felt heavier than the noise itself. Then Clara whispered, "It makes people forget, until they forget enough to follow it." Sheriff Hale frowned. "Follow it where?" Clara looked toward the mountains. "We never stay long enough to find out." That night, 3 residents disappeared. No signs of struggle. No footprints. Only empty beds and open front doors facing the forest. The next morning, none of their families remembered they existed. Using Reverend Turner's journal, Sarah discovered missing pages hidden inside an old Bible. The final entry revealed the truth. The hollow is not a place but a hunger. It consumes memory before it consumes people. Those forgotten become part of it. The Harpers finally confessed. They had first encountered the phenomenon nearly 200 years earlier. Unlike others, they remembered because they had escaped. Since then, they moved constantly. Whenever memory distortions began worsening, they fled before the hollow fully awakened. But Red Ash Hollow was different. It had grown stronger. That evening, Sarah, Hale, and the Harpers climbed Crow Ridge. Deep within the mountains, they discovered an impossible clearing. Hundreds of personal belongings covered the ground. Children's toys, wedding rings, photographs, journals. Evidence of lives erased from memory. Then Sarah noticed something horrifying. Among the objects, she found her mother's necklace. A woman who had supposedly died years before Sarah moved to Tennessee. Yet Sarah suddenly realized she couldn't remember her mother's face anymore. The hollow had already begun taking pieces of her. Then voices echoed from the forest. People calling loved ones' names, begging for help. The Harpers immediately recognized them. "Don't answer," Elias warned. "Those aren't people anymore." The hollow awakened completely before dawn. Residents wandered from their homes toward Crow Ridge, expressionless, drawn by voices only they could hear. Sarah struggled, remembering her own childhood. Sheriff Hale forgot the names of soldiers he fought beside. Even the Harpers began losing memories. The hollow had never been this powerful before. Elias made a devastating decision. "We have to destroy every record of this town." "What?" Sarah asked. "If the hollow feeds through remembrance," Elias explained, "then we must make Red Ash Hollow impossible to find." As the townspeople approached the clearing, Elias and Margaret remained behind. The Harpers had spent generations running. Now they chose to stop. Using Reverend Turner's instructions, Sarah and Hale burned records, maps, ledgers, land deeds, photographs, everything connecting the hollow to the outside world. As flames consumed the final documents, the voices stopped. The townspeople collapsed unconscious. Morning sunlight finally touched Crow Ridge, but Elias and Margaret Harper were gone. Only Clara and Benjamin remained. "We don't know if they're dead," Clara said quietly, "or if the hollow finally remembered them." Months later, Sarah and Hale left Tennessee. They never spoke publicly about Red Ash Hollow. The town slowly emptied. Families moved away. Roads disappeared. Maps stopped mentioning the settlement. Years later, hikers occasionally reported strange experiences near Crow Ridge, forgetting why they entered certain trails, hearing familiar voices calling from the trees, discovering photographs containing people nobody recognized, and sometimes, travelers passing through nearby towns described meeting a quiet brother and sister, a teenage girl named Clara, a young boy named Benjamin, neither appearing to age, always staying briefly, always leaving before winter arrived. And whenever people asked where their parents were, they answered the same way. They stayed behind so everyone else could remember who they were. Because some horrors don't kill you. Some horrors simply wait until the world forgets you ever existed.